All right, so today we're just going to do a little bit of working with docx files. I realized we promised we would save some time at the beginning for questions that people had. So this is a chance, I guess, to get ahead of some of the things that we'll take more time with tomorrow. So does anybody have anything? This is a little different from the blockers. It's just docassemble questions you have that be helpful to share with everybody, I suppose, before we get right into Teaching Tuesday. I think we'll have to develop some different things around that. So actually, I won't pressure everyone to have that right now, but we'll keep that in mind for next week. This is another chance to have people ask coding questions too. So I put on the Slack, I put a link to this content. I think, Mariah, you probably won't have it yet because I believe that happens. You don't get to see the chat log in Zoom, if I remember right. So let me just put that in there again.
Thank you.
So we're going to just be following along with this. But the basic thing that we're doing here is we're going to look at this docx template file that's on a card here in Trello. It's this motion to dismiss for non-essential eviction. And I'm just going to talk with you a little bit about how to create a docx attachment to your YAML file. And then we'll go into some of the ways that are specific to our virtual court project, how you work with that and how you get the questions in that you need, since none of the questions will be written in advance for you the same way. So it's doing a little bit more from scratch. So let's go ahead and look at this file first and see what we're working with here. And I'm going to go ahead and open that on my computer here as well. This is a little unique to some of the other motions and other forms that people are working with, because there actually is very little that is specific to the user's situation that we're going to be asking about. So we might simulate that just so you get to experience that as well. When I'm looking at a form like this, there's not a field built in, but I can kind of get the sense that wherever there are these lines, that's probably where something is going to expected to be filled in the form. That is going to be replaced by a question that maybe we are going to write and maybe the one that's built in. In this case, I think almost all of these are going to be built in to our basic questions file. We don't have to write any from scratch. So I'm looking here, we're going to ask for information about the court. A docket number maybe, although that probably is something that the person would know, but maybe not. And the name of the parties. This looks like this whole body of the motion is going to be the same every time. So there's nothing I really need to do here. And then there's this signature block, and as well as a certificate of service. This is the one area that we're going to have to do some of our own question writing. But I'm looking at this, and it makes sense for us to come up with a new basic question, I think, that handles the certificate of service, because we're going to start having more motions where service really is an issue. All right, so when I'm looking at a form like this, one of the things that I start doing is I just start thinking about what types of questions we need to ask. And that's what we've just done, really. It's really just about the parties, the court, and then how they're going to get it to the court. We might think about whether we're going to help them decide if this is the right motion for them to use and do a little bit of screening out. But it seems like it's pretty much a yes or no question. It's just really if they agree that this text here applies to them, that it's not one of these exceptions, kind of the inverse, I suppose, of these parts A and B, then they can go forward and fill out the motion. And if they answer, yes, it was criminal activity, or yes, it was a lease violation that impacts health or safety, then they should not fill out the motion. So let's take a look at what we're going to do inside our interview now. And if you want to follow along with this here, you might download this motion file right here into your playground, but maybe we'll start with just like a very basic from scratch one that you don't need to follow along with the exact form, but let's see. So if you're in the Docassemble playground and you create a new interview, let's just go through the very basics of what we're doing inside when we're working with an attachment. So maybe we'll call it docx test. I'm gonna have to put something inside here, which could just be that separator. And click save. And let's think about our Hello World exercise that we had in assignment 1, Teaching Tuesday 1. Let's think about, and we'll essentially build off of that. So let's create a question here. And ask for the person's name. And if I want to ask for information from the user, can someone tell me what I should be writing here next in order to get a place where I can ask for information from the user?
When you start with fields, you use fields?
Yes, that's exactly right. So just going to write the word fields with a colon at the end of the line, and then a new line. And what might I put here next?
The dash, and then username.
And then I'm going to put a colon there, and then on the right-hand part comes something we're familiar with too, which is going to be the variable name. So let's go ahead and use user underscore name for now, just to keep it simple. Now what I need to do is to have a place for the person to be able to download their actual docx file. And that is also going to be inside a question block. So a good heading for this might be something like, your file is ready. And there are a couple of options that I have for how I want to display that file to the user who's ready to download it. And one of the simplest ways is for me to put an attachment block that's just embedded right inside the question. So we could start with that. One of the things that you can do when you're trying to remember the syntax and get that exactly right is just to scroll down a little bit in your playground and look at the example blocks here. So I'm going to look under the heading documents. That's where all of the documents are that go with something that you're going to assemble at the end. And this is the really basic syntax for a document. And I don't believe that there's an example here that talks about how to create a docx attachment, which is a little funny because there's one here that says docx format. This one that says output formats that lets you do some control. None of these are the exact thing that we're looking for. But they give us the starting part of our syntax. So we can look at this as our reference. So we see here we have our question, then we have the word attachment or attachments. Both actually are synonym for each other. You can decide to use attachment if you want to keep it consistent with the number you have. And then we have a couple of things underneath. We have, this looks like it's a list, so that it explains why it could be more than one attachment. But let's do the very most basic thing here and just do one file. We're not going to use any of the other things we can configure here, like the name or the content or the file name that you download it as. We're going to leave those alone for now. So The very minimal hello world that we need to put here is just literally the text docx attachment, colon, and then the name of the docx file that's going to have our content in it. So let's go ahead and create a new Word file that we're going to call hello world. And we'll go ahead and reference it just like that for now. Then we can hit save. And I'm going to put that on the chat as well. Hold on. Let's see. Getting used to the new Zoom a little bit. Oh, someone was asking whether it's recording, but did we confirm that it is?
Yeah,
It
I
is
see the
recording.
Okay.
Yes, it is recording.
Just wanted to make sure. All right, so just in case anyone is stuck, we've gone through a lot right now. Anybody have a prediction what will happen if I hit save and run right now? Are we going to get our file downloaded?
There'll be an error, right? Nothing will happen.
Yeah, why would that be, Mariah?
Well, you have no file connected and there's no mandatory question.
Yes, those are two different reasons. So let's go ahead and see that behavior first. Okay, so it's telling us the first error it's giving us is there's no content provided in attachment, which is our clue that, oh, wait a second, we didn't actually add a file there yet. So I will show you something that you can do later on your own. There are a couple of ways for us to get files into our playground here. I'm going to go ahead and make a new Word document. I'm going to call it hello world.docx. So it has to be named exactly that, the same thing that we put inside our attachment. And let's open that up. And I want to say hello to the person that is taking the interview. Anybody have a guess for what I would do to put in the variable that we just created inside our interview into the docx file? What would be your first guess? What do we need to do? And I'm not looking for the exact thing, but just the concept, I guess. So what do we need to do in order to get the variable name in here? What something is going to be, it should be pretty clear about what we're doing, right? So we have, here's our file that we're working with. Here is the playground. What variable name did we store the person's name in?
User underscore name.
Yes, that's right. So we're going to want to get that into here somewhere, right? Somehow. What are some guesses about how we actually get a variable into a docx template? What would be a guess? What are some possible ways that could happen without knowing anything about how it works? What would you think would be some ways we would get it in there?
I think you need some kind of special characters to let docassemble know that I want to use the variable username rather than the text user underscore name.
Yeah, so what did we do when we wanted to show a variable inside a question inside the YAML file? Does anyone remember that? Let's say we wanted to show the person's username right here.
Money sign parentheses. Is that right?
Yeah, we used, so I'm hearing $sign and then parentheses. Does that look right to everybody?
Was it the brackets?
Yeah, and Michael, tell us which brackets that we should be using here, if you can remember.
To the right of the P, at least on my keyboard. I don't know what they're called, like the squiggly ones.
And I usually call those curly braces. Yep, that's
Yep.
that's right. Yeah. So that's a good guess, I think, right? Let's just temporarily take this out. And just confirm that this is what happens. So let's just verify our prediction here about what we do inside and refresh our memory about what happens inside a interview YAML file.
And Quinten, is that Mako or Markdown syntax?
It is Mako is the name of those tags.
So MAKO. So if you're looking for that, for different ways to do that syntax, if you forget it, you can jot down Mako, and that's where you might be able to find a refresher on the syntax.
So this is how, so that is right? We put it in our name, we ran it, we got that here. Well, let's just take a look and see what happens if we do that inside our docx template. So let's just save. I'm going to move the mandatory down to my attachment question here. And let's actually go ahead and get this uploaded to the docassemble playground here. So let's just try doing the exact same thing. I think this is something that you might do when you're getting used to this the first time.
So are there spaces between like the curly braces and then user, and then it's at the end name space curly braces? Or is it not like that?
For readability, it's a very good habit. And I think there are really rare circumstances in which if you don't include them, it could cause problems. But it should work without the space, but it's easier to read if you have a space.
Okay.
So there's a couple of ways for us to upload a file. So one is to go to this folders menu right here. And I think everybody who's worked with a PDF has already done this. Then we go to templates. And then Maeve just showed me something yesterday that I didn't even know, which is that you can upload by dragging and dropping to this choose file area there. So that's one way for us to get our file up there. And that's a way that you'll all be able to do right now. Another way that you can get files up to your playground is to hit the sync button right here, if you have your playground connected to Google Drive. So to do that, you go to the profile menu, other settings, and then Google Drive synchronization. And then you have to click through a few screens to get that permission set up. So I don't think you need to do that right now, but when you're editing in a docx file, you're going to probably be syncing back and forth quite a bit, because you're going to be making changes both in the template and in the interview, and you're going to get them to match up to each other. So it's a good thing to do if you're going to be working in the docx for the rest of this project for you. But let me show you what that looks like once you have taken that step to sync up your playground with Google Drive. I'm just going to click the sync button. Takes a little while. It's a little bit longer than it usually takes. So it gives you a little log of what changes it made and what things it copied over. see what happens now. So it's still telling me no content provided in attachment. Let's see if it thinks that that template is there. Let's see, what did we do differently? Let's see. Could be that I have a mistake here. Oh, I think I do actually. And I think I probably have that mistake in the assignment. I'm sorry. So docx attachment file is actually the syntax I'm supposed to use here. So that's a good thing to remember. Even when you've done this a lot, it's easy to forget the syntax. So it's always good to check it. And let's see, what else am I missing here? So I like to go right here. Again, all of this information is going to be right here in the document section of the documentation. And what we're doing, there are a couple of different things that reference docx. But what we're going to be doing is this heading 3 under assembling documents, assembling docx templates. There is another way of working with docx templates that is giving them a list of fields. And I think that might not be in the documentation anymore, but that would be another source of confusion. But the big thing to remember is you could create docx templates by converting a markdown file to docx, and we don't want to do that either. Generally, that's not what we're trying to do here. So this is the exact syntax that I should be using here. Let's see, what did I write? Docx attachment file. I needed a docx template file. Let's try saving and running again. All right, so I got a file. And let me just give this updated syntax to everybody on the chat. So you all have that in case you were stuck. But let me just actually stop here and ask if anyone has any questions so far. What questions does anybody have so far about what we've done? I know we.
Quinten, when you ran the program, it looks like it went right to the mandatory question page with the document without asking for the username. Well, I think I just wanted to bring that up, and I think we'll see why. But
Yes, good
okay.
catch. Yeah.
All right. I figured out the answer to my question as I asked it.
Yeah, okay, so let's take a look at that. I think that's a pretty natural thing to jump to since we've all seen ahead that's what happened. So let's see what's in the file. Let's, when you use this style of attachment block that we've just used, it gives you all this extra stuff with it. You get this little green text that says the following document, or documents if you had more than one, have been created for you. Shows the name of the document, and then this download tab, and then a bunch of extra stuff, which you may or may not end up really wanting all the time. You get an email box, you get a link to the PDF, and you get a link to an editable version of the file that's exactly like what you, it's a version of the docx template with all of the variables replaced, but it's still editable, so you can keep making further changes. This is great for when you're iterating and trying to preview things, because a PDF is generally a lot easier to open right in the browser. So anybody have a guess as to what might have gone on with our template file? We see we still have the text here, $, curly braces, and then username inside. So what might be going on that didn't get us to have that be replaced with the text the person entered?
We might need different tags in the template than we would use in the question.
Yes, that is exactly right. And I'd just like to show it to you that way because it is one of the things where it's easy to get a little mixed up when you're moving back and forth between working in a PDF and working inside the interview file and working inside a docx template file. The syntax in each place is just very slightly different. The concepts are the same. The things you can do are essentially the same, but the way that you work with the variables is slightly different. So inside a docx file, this is the variation that we have for just showing a variable right inside the text. Instead of using a $sign and a curly brace, we use double curly braces like this. And that's it. It still otherwise works the same. You're just typing in stuff into the document. You don't have to use like a special field from like a hidden menu inside Microsoft Word. It's just text that you type in. And that's the key thing to remember, is that we have that variation in the text where it's double curly braces instead of a single one and a $sign. Okay, so let's try saving our template. Once we've made that change to use double curly braces around the variable name, I'm going to use that same sync button to get my latest version up to Docassemble. You can also use the drag and drop menu like we did here. One thing you'll notice with syncing, just FYI, is that once it's synced to the playground, it has a weird habit of thinking that's the newest version of the file. So it might give you a message that says it's updated it on Google Drive. That's harmless though, because if it's been changed on both ends, then you'll get the newest version. But that in this case, it hasn't changed on the local copy, so it's not breaking anything. All right, so let's just run it one more time now that we have the new version of our docx template there. So now it is asking for our name. And now I do have my name right there inside the docx template. So can anybody think of what are some benefits, those of you who've worked with PDFs, what are some benefits about this style of working with a template that you can see so far? What are some differences that you notice, other than the fact that we use double curly braces instead of single? I could get Socratic, but I've been told that may not be the best idea. Just pick on people who've already volunteered. Yeah, Matt.
So I just had a question. Differences between a PDF template and a docx template?
Yes. Yeah, for those of you who've had enough exposure, I guess, maybe to how the PDF attachment block works and how you fill in a PDF file.
All right, well, I'll suggest one difference, which is that you have, with the docx, you have much more control over formatting. So if the text is very long, you could have the formatting of the document be fluid and adjust to that. So if you're just inserting a few words or a paragraph, you'll have much greater flexibility to have something that looks good rather than kind of blocky or patchwork.
Yeah, I think that's a key difference that you can see right now. I agree with that. What questions people have about what we've done so far? Did everybody manage to get to this point with their document?
I haven't, but I think it's just an error with my code. So
Okay, well, I think if you're comfortable sharing, then it's always really helpful to see errors. I think that's one of the best ways to learn. Would you be willing to share so we can solve that together?
I think it's sharing now.
Yes.
Just, here. I think that's my code there, if you can see it.
Okay, yeah, can anybody help Sinead see where the error is that might be causing her? Can anybody see something on line 1 maybe that might be
Yeah, the
problem?
file name is in line 1. But can that not be deleted?
I think what's happened there, Sinead, is just that you might have clicked on the name of the template over here in the right, and it just
Over
accidentally
here.
inserted it when you weren't noticing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think if we just delete hello world.docx, I think it'll be a.
I think you still need the question though, right?
I mean, before she did, oh, she did it. What if she scrolls all the way up in the variables panel, see if there's a syntax error up there that might have, yeah.
Yeah, so Maeve, I heard you giving a suggestion to Sinead about how to get this first question block to work.
I think that she might have deleted too much when she took away. I think there needs to be question. I think there needs to be a thing that says question right above that in line 1.
Here, where?
Yeah, basically that needs to be. Does it not need to be above there? Does that not be copied and placed in line 1, and then what is your name appears in line 2?
Okay. Oh yeah.
Because when Sinead deleted the document, it also deleted that.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. So we save and run and see if we've solved the syntax problem.
Okay, yeah. That one.
Great. All right. And I actually am, okay, great. I was gonna say I'm logged in with the wrong Zoom account, so I can't control over the sharing.
Wait, do you need me to control over the sharing?
No,
Thank you.
it didn't matter. I just asked Sinead to stop sharing, which she'd already stopped, so that worked out fine. All right, so now what we're gonna do is actually put this together with the real document that we're trying to automate here. And you can see a little bit about how this all interacts with the virtual court project and some of the things that you right now will want you to do a little bit more manually inside a docx template than you do with the PDF, which generates some of the questions for you. So the main thing that you're really saving, just to start out with running the wizard, is that it's done some boilerplate for you. But most of that boilerplate really lives inside this file called basic questions. And you don't ever have to write that even if you're using a docx template. So I'll just show you a little bit about what that is like. And I'm gonna just send everybody here to this card so you can work along with the same template file that I'm gonna be working in. And I'll give you the same little stub that we have as well. So the way to download a file from a card in Trello, by the way, is to click on the card. Click on the file, It's this one here, sample motion to dismiss for non-essential eviction. And then click open in new tab. It's a lot of steps, but I don't know a better way. Maybe someone does know a better way to download a file from Trello, but that's the way that I found works the best. So you're going to save this file, upload it to your Playground the same way, and you might want to rename it. I just took out the word sample from the beginning of the file name. That's a good habit to get in, to not always upload the file exactly the same way it was originally named. Give it something that's a little bit more meaningful. So I'll let you do that as well. And I have that file open here. I'm actually going to reopen it from the right folder in my Playground. And let's take a look at it and just think of one thing we want to change. Okay, so let's keep this open. Let's look at our reference list of variable names. And let's take a look at the first line of our document here and think about what something is that is a variable text inside the document that we're going to want to replace from a docx, excuse me, with a variable that we provide it from docassemble. What can anybody think of something that we're going to want to change? Let's just look at the first line here, something that we should replace, and let's just do a little iteration here to get that into our file. What's the first text in the document that we're going to want to substitute with something that we get from our interview?
What county they're in.
Yeah, let's start with the county. You're right. So county here actually is going to mean the county that the court is in. So let's take a look at our list of variable names here and see if we can find something about the court.
There?
Just right here, yep.
I think that courts, maybe courts.
So this is a little bit of a tricky one in some way, but there are a few things we're going to change. So we can start with, I'll give you the first one. So the county is part of the court's address. So I didn't actually list here all the different attributes of an address, which maybe I should do, especially county, since that's the one that's going to come up a lot. So this is going to be the variable name that we're going to want to have here. What do I need to put into our docx template in order to make sure that docassemble knows that's going to be a variable name and not literal text that we typed in?
The double curly braces on either side.
I think we actually, try to remember if there's another way to get the county that I already had in there, but I think this is the right way. Okay, and then we can go, might as well, since we're right here, replace the second one as well, right? So what goes here? Just looking at this list on the left.
Court name. So courts square bracket your square bracket dot name.
Yeah. Or and maybe you might have caught that right above that, there's another way to get the same thing. So it would be the other way to do the same thing as name.
Just without the name and the full stop. Just quote 0.
All right. So let's save this template file that we have right now with just those 2 changes that we've made so far. And I know that there was a lot of typing that just happened, so I'm going to copy and put that on the chat in case that's helpful for anybody who's following along. Did I, let's see, okay. Just making sure I didn't send anything as a private message to anybody that I intended to put to everybody on the channel. Looks good so far. All right, I'm going to sync. Get that template up into docassemble playground. And I swear this is taking longer just because everybody's watching, but that is just something to be aware of, that there is a little bit of a wait when you're doing this. So you might end up batching stuff, but it's good to, as I think Michelle mentioned on another call, to keep your changes iterative, to make small changes that are testable before you do a bunch of work and you don't, so it's harder to trace your error. Okay, so there are a couple things that are a little bit different about this interview stub that we have compared to what we started with in our little hello world exercise with the docx template. Can anybody tell me some differences that they notice? Anybody have a guess what's going on here in lines 1 through 3?
You're including the variable names labels. Those probably aren't the right terms, right?
Yeah, is that Mariah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, what do you mean by that? What do you think's going on? What's
So instead of putting in what question needs to come up when you write in county address, this file is telling docassemble what questions to ask to get those answers. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to say it. So this file here that we're including, the word include is a really good keyword to look for. We're incorporating this other file here that's part of the docassemble.MAVirtualCourt package that's called basic-questions.yml. That has some other questions written in it. Yes, Michelle.
If I can, a way I think about it is that when I put the name of that file there, when the code runs, when it does its thing, it pretends like you basically did copy and paste and put everything that was in that file into that very spot. That's a way that helps me think about how the code is behaving during the interview. That's all.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There are some times where the order of questions inside your YAML file matters. So thinking of it that way is very helpful, because if you have this at the top, it could, in some cases, do something different than if you have that same exact include statement at the bottom of your file. So that is something to remember. I think keeping it at the top is a good habit to get in for everybody most of the time, because then you know whatever questions you write after it take priority. That's the main behavior you have to know about question order, that it goes top to bottom, where the bottommost question gets the highest priority. I see a question on the chat. Okay, so we're going to have to stop right at 2, as David's mentioned to me. Okay, so let's look at this attachment question right underneath. Anybody have a prediction about what will happen if I hit save and run right now? I'll give you a little bit more window into the screen so you can see. We get a little yellow information message that gives us a little clue.
So there's no mandatory question.
Yeah, there's no mandatory. That's right. So we could always add a mandatory here. Would that do what we wanted? Well, let's see what happens. So we definitely do have a mandatory block now. You can see that our interview did run some other mandatory blocks. These are ones that came from the basic questions file. We still didn't get anything. And that's because this question here doesn't actually output anything on the screen by itself. So in order to display the contents of a file or to get a file to be downloaded, you still do need a question block somewhere that's used that the person can interact with.
And if you noticed on the error message, it specifically mentioned questions. It says there's no mandatory question. Is finished asking all questions marked as mandatory? A bit above in the first sentence. Docassemble is finished executing all code blocks marked as initial mandatory, and finished asking all questions marked as mandatory. So there's no code and no question block that was marked as mandatory for us in our interview, I believe.
Right, because that's a good point, because we could have had a question that interacted with the final screen in a different way that wasn't, it could have been a code block that interacted with the final screen in some way. Maybe it redirected us to a new website. It could just output text on the screen rather than trying to give us a formatted question page. So it doesn't literally have to be a question, but it almost always is going to be. And yes, that is a good clue, and it's certainly good to get in the habit of reading this screen carefully and not letting it distract you with the error message, but to try to read through and see if you can make sense of what it is. It often has a clue for you. Okay, let's do a question block, and I'm going to do something a little bit different this time. So you'll see here in my attachment block, I gave it a variable name. It's just the variable name I chose here is just test. If I didn't want to see that little attachment block that has all of the other extra stuff around it, like the email button and the title of the document and showing a PDF and a docx, if I wanted to have my own way of displaying the document to the user, here's one option that I would have. I can just give my attachment a variable name and reference it right here inside the text of a question. So there is a bug in Docassemble right now that I'm hoping Jonathan will fix soon. I'm trying to get him some information, but you'll see what happens when I do this. Okay, so this is a good thing to learn when you're working with the basic questions file. We didn't choose the best example because we didn't have this particular thing defined, but let's read this, and keeping in mind the time, we've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to just solve this one for you here. There are a few things that we need to have defined in our question and that the interview generator will do for you, but you might find it easier or simpler to do manually when you are working with a docx template. And you'll get this iteratively. So I think one thing we can do is come up with a sample code block that just does all of those for you. And it may make sense to just list that on that same page on GitHub that is linked to from the assignment page. So let's kind of discover those together a little bit now. One thing we need to define is a variable named allowed courts. This is the syntax for what you need. to do. And I won't go into exactly what all of it means, but it's maybe helpful to say this is a list of courts, and it's going to look for exact names of those courts. So we'll give you an example that has all of the court names for you to reference. Let's start with just these two for now. So this is kind of exciting. By including that file, basic-questions.yml, we did have to put this one line of code here so far. We were able to get a question written about the court without us having to do anything customized in our interview here. So we have a list here of all of the housing courts and all of the district courts.
And how would someone know what to put in the list? What they could put in the list? And what happens if they put something in the list that we don't have?
Yeah, that's a good thing for us to experiment. Let's give that a try. So there don't happen to be any courts that are of the fake type. So it won't give you an error message. Just won't show anything because there won't be any courts that it returns that match that filter. I think the way you would find out what those courts that you can choose from are is by us giving you a sample that lists all of the court names. So that's something we'll do. All right, let me take you back here. You'll notice a few other things are done right away. So we get this survey link here. We get the question, the back button is at the bottom of the screen now. We get this text to speech here as well. It does take a second to start. Generally, it starts before now. But and we get the icon here. I'm not going to mess around with that right now. But so those are behaviors that come with the basic questions file as well. They control the way that the interview looks to match a certain style. Notice we have this big blank icon here. That's supposed to be a preview of the document. That's the bug that I mentioned. But if I click it, let me do that again. This is an error you might run into if you're running things from the playground often. So every time you hit save and run, it creates a new session that overwrites the one that you had. That's only really behavior that happens in the playground. So if you get that file not found error, that's probably what happened, is that you have the same interview open twice, and it was behavior that created a new session rather than, it overwrote the existing session, that is, rather than creating a new session.
So Quinten, the good and bad about using that attached YAML file is that you don't have to write all those questions up. But what if you wanted to change the question a little bit? Is that you have to put it lower in the question box, your changes to that user, that question, or is there a way to sort of amend it slightly?
Great question. So what I would say is that when we're working on this project, we would love to help you avoid problems where you're continually having to change that file. So we could definitely.
So for that court question, the one you just had up, I would want to tell users where to find the name of the court like how to know what court it is if they had gotten a complaint or whatever, like the text of your question asking what their court is. I'd want to help them know what their court is.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so I'm going to go in. So what you could always do is you could look at that file, the basic questions file. And the simplest thing really is to copy and paste it. Let's do a little tweak. I want to make sure it comes after that include block, but it can go anywhere else in the file as long as it's after that one. So yeah, that's a good point. So this question, they've already had a case that they're responding to. It's a motion to dismiss. Look at your summons and complaint to find the name of the court your case was filed in. That might be a change that we would want to make, right? Does that sound like basically what you're suggesting?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So now I hit save and run. It's done a couple things. So one, actually, this question that I copied in has a court filter in it where it's looking for the housing court that matches. So that's actually getting us a little bit closer to the way we wanted already. So it needed to know the address where I lived to get to this question. And it's already figured out what court I can file in based on that address. So let's try playing around with that a little bit. Like, let's say I chose an address in Worcester. Let me see. I'm gonna have to type a little bit more to get there. Now I'm expecting I'll get something in the central housing court. So let's just check that behavior.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So this exact court selector is something the court hasn't approved for us to use yet. So that's why it's not turned on by default. But I actually didn't even intend to grab that, but it just lets you see the ways you can customize that question.
Quinten, do you want to include adding question IDs when people are writing questions?
Yes, that's good behavior for us to model. It's something that I think I need to write up some notes for, but the basic thing is with an ID is that you can give each question an ID. The ID is helpful later when we're translating the questions, because it's a unique identifier people see in the translation file. It's also helpful when we're getting analytics, because the ID is sent to Google Analytics to help us see where people have problems. It's a label that goes with the question that we can see. This is the place where someone taking this interview stopped and gave up. So
Also,
yes, IDs are a good thing to use.
I think the other thing is also when you're editing, especially if you're working collaboratively with people and working on language, you may actually change the question. And then how do you refer to that question when you're talking to somebody else? You know, for example, the screen, you've done the link thing, but I think it's really helpful to know the question ID isn't going to change, hopefully, just the question itself might change.
Those are all really good points. Yeah, those are three really good reasons to give your questions IDs.
And I've got another one, which is testing. When we start teaching you testing, IDs can be a way to keep your testing framework from having to be more closely, like having to change your testing framework every single time.
Yep, those are all really good points. So what I want you to take away from this so far is, I know we hit 2 o'clock, and so I'm thinking our Zoom is going to end any second now.
1 or 2 seconds.
1 or 2 seconds, okay. So this behavior of including the file that has a library of questions in it, it's not magic. You can override the questions with your own ones if they're better, and if you need to customize them for your use. Just make sure they come after the include. The other thing is, in a way, they are magic because we don't have to write anything. This interview, we didn't get all the way through it, but I can finish it with writing only one question, which is just the question about certificate of service. Everything else here you'll see is there's already a question written for it. And someday we'll have that translated into multiple languages. And again, you get all the translations for free. And then finally, the different ways of working with the attachment block, where you can reference the attachment in the question text like this. Hopefully we'll get that preview icon working if you've assigned it a variable name. And if you want to have that behavior of letting it get the email button and that other text that goes around with the default way of downloading an attachment, that's an option too. So we've hit all the way to the mark. A few of you got in questions. I know the students, a lot of you did not yet. Feel free to follow up with questions on the Slack or anybody else who joined us who isn't a student as well. Do we have time for like 1 or 2 questions, David? Or
no, I think I gotta jump
really
off
gotta stop.
for a bit.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.